Today I want to spend a little time just getting some of the lighter colors in to the rest of the painting so that the darks can be layered in later. And it's okay if these colors are a little blended together because that's, you know, they don't need to be distinct separated shapes. And I don't think I'm going to need that. So mostly I'm going to be using Quin Rose and Quin Coral and some cerulean blue and phthalo blue. There probably will be little bits of, let me get some cobalt exposed here. I think that one is cobalt. All right, so let me just start out. I do want to work around a few little whites, so I am gonna kind of carefully start with some of these light colors, but I do want to paint around the white highlights. And they transition pretty quickly between pink areas and blue areas. Yeah, I just grabbed some cerulean blue, but I think I would prefer the transparent brightness of phthalo blue in some of these areas. So let me just, actually his buttons on his shirt are a nice light color, so we'll get those in there. I've done already some of the mic stand on this side of the painting. Go ahead and reinforce a couple of areas that got a little bit too light as they dried. And let's see, there's another couple of little white areas I want to preserve over here. Now, grab a little bit of Quin Coral, because when the coral and the phthalo blend, they should make some nice violets. And I do want a few violets in here. Let me consciously mix. See, this seems like as good a spot as any. Let me consciously mix a little bit of violet to have to throw in here and there as well, just in case the blends don't happen enough on their own. Now, oops, I was just about to say my phthalo is an extremely pale blend, but I see that, of course, just as soon as I started to say that, I must have hit a little edge in this well and grabbed a little bit of the nearly pure phthalo. So come along here. I do want to have a little bit lighter highlight in the center, so I'm kind of going around that. A lot of this is just coming down in these areas. Be a lot of darks that'll help define what's going on. Let's see, I've got a few more lights that I want to save here. And I could just be coming across, but I'm trying to pay attention to all my little lights and make sure I don't lose those. Is there a couple more right there? but I want to remain as close to white as possible. That one, those are actually blue, that one was white. Okay, now, where I'm getting these few darker streaks of phthalo, I'm trying to rub those out a little bit. Let me get my, you know, I also had added some acrylic blue along the edge here the other day, and I'm not sure if I didn't just actually dislodge a little of that. I thought it would have been totally dry by now, but I'm a little suspicious about that. Let's grab a few more of these violets are coming down this way. And the drum head is primarily violets. And I did allow the blue to extend beyond, which is actually okay, because it's fairly wide in some of these areas anyhow. And while I have the violet out, let me just go ahead and throw some of that in here. There are some whites I'm going to want to retain, but you know, whether they are the exact same location as where they are in the photograph doesn't matter a heck of a lot, as long as I do retain some of the whites. Let's see, a few more violets over here while I got the violet out. Let me go back to the phthalo. And get a few of those popped in here. And you know, you can see when they layer on top of each other, they actually add a lot more interest anyhow. So just let some of the blue run wherever it wants to. Now, you know, these areas will become the light reflections on the drum head. Now that's a white I want to retain, so let me actually pick up a little bit smaller brush for a moment here. Get a little bit more clear phthalo in my brush, and let me do some detailed painting around that, because I don't want to obscure that white. And there are, my phthalo had mixed a little bit with the lavender color in a couple areas where I really wanted the phthalo kind of popping out. So I'm gonna just go back and reinforce some of that. Now this pole picks up the phthalo and it's pretty much runs down this entire pole. So I'm doing some detailed painting. There will be other blues brought in and around here. I want these to be nice light phthalo reflections. All right, now let me go back. Pick up some more of that coral. actually mix in a little bit of cobalt with it. Just a smidgen more. And I want to throw a little more variation in the drum head. It's just needs a little more variety, and there's also a few places where it's just little dots of reflections of more of the coral or twin rose color that are popping out. So I'm going to just use the coral, and I'm going to put a little bit of the cerulean blue into parts of this. Get some nice variations going. That's plenty. And there's another nice, really bright area up here. It will get darker eventually, but I put a little bit of the phthalo blue in here. As I said before, the phthalo blue got a little muted by some of the other colors, and so that pool is not quite as intense. The phthalo blue really is, so I'm gonna just come back and reinforce some pieces of that. Now let's go back in here and kind of continue down with some of these areas to get my brush a little wetter, because this is not intended to be precise painting here. Let's see, that's where that guy is. It's a red area, but there's a fair amount of phthalo coming across on this stripe of the drum, and I want to kind of get that idea going in here so I don't lose that shape. There's another really nice splash of phthalo that's here, kind of runs down into this area. And needs some of this color in the underpainting down here. Yeah, there are also some of the rose color that I don't want to lose either, so let's bring some of that in here, because there's nice repeats of the rose in a variety of areas, and I don't want to lose all of those. All right, and there's a little bit of rose actually haloing that circle, so let me get some of that in, follow that up. Here. It seems like it's kind of a lighter version of what I'm seeing. I want it a little paler. Don't want to obscure that white spot. There's two little white spots there to preserve. Maybe one here. So the only places where I'm kind of, really narrowing down and making sure that I avoid areas and when I'm going around these whites. One white there just closed up a little bit more than I want it. It's kind of a bright reflection off one of the drums. It may not be quite as white in my painting as in the photo. If I use a little paper towel, me get that back close enough to white, that'll be fine. And throw a little more of this color over here. And this area in his arm, where his arm is coming down, it's really hot pink where the lights are hitting him. And I'm going around this blue shadow on his arm because I'm not sure that the blue will pop back out properly. Grab a little bit of Quin Coral for a color shift here. And then I think we have another symbol. Here that I want to transition fairly softly into a blue reflection on that symbol. Actually continues right across there. And let me intensify this some more. A little bit thicker paint in that spot. And continue with some of this paint coming across in this area. I was working in earlier. All the little reflections that I put in earlier, so now I'm going to go slightly more precise in my painting. Try to go around some of these shapes. I may not be highlighting them in quite the same way. Actually, this is a good spot. I'll take a little bit of the ultramarine and that verditer. Maybe a little bit brighter here. Carefully go around some of these lighter reflection areas. There will be one more wet coat that I bring over this whole thing in a little while, but for now I just want to get the basic shapes in. And let me get this. Let's see, let me get this shape in here. This wire is coming out and crossing over his arm. So I want that line to be pretty clean. It's not blending into his arm, it's just a wire that comes across there. Now, I'll need some lighter highlights, so right now I'm just bringing down a alright, so I'm going to put some phthalo highlights in first. I'm not sure these are truly phthalo colored all the way down in the photo itself, but I think making them pop out a little bit is, with the phthalo, is it makes them a little more interesting. There's a little shape there for sure, that's some phthalo. I've lost track of what blues I put out here. Now I've got Indanthrone blue. I believe that's in that well, so now I'm not 100% sure. This might be just a blend of the Verditer and the Indanthrone, but I don't recall at this point what I put in there. So this color is good for this darker region. And it carves out some shapes on this side too, even though it's mostly going to be the phthalo. I actually want a little variation over here in this blue, so I'm gonna just put a little bit of this darker color coming around into some of these other areas so it's not all so consistent. Now, you know, I could just be painting over this whole background. I'm pretty much sticking to the shapes so I don't lose them. You know, as I paint these shapes, you know, I don't see my pencil lines anymore, and so rather than paint over the whole thing, you know, like in here, it will be becoming a darker blue. I'll just put a light blue here now, just to establish a first color. But in the long run, that will be all much darker. But these are, well, this will actually be a darker blue too. But at least now I can see those shapes. I want to preserve these whites. But this will be a good goalpost too, that there's darker stuff going on. Little bit of phthalo and Verditer, throw that in there, and then I'm just going to do some paler colors around, which will eventually become dark, just so we have a little bit of something going on behind the darker colors when we lay those in. Those are our only little reflection spots. Okay. This, I want to pick up a little bit more of a lavendery hue in some of these areas. I was counting on those two colors bleeding and running into each other a little bit more than they did, so I'll force the issue. Just add that color in there and then soften those edges. And then, although I don't see it in my drawing, there is actually one more. Oh, okay, I get it now. This is a little more of his arm. I didn't draw the line between his shirt and his arm. And grab a little bit more of the violet in that transition. Grab some cobalt in there. It's getting closer to the color I want, so I'll throw a little of this in here. So that also, this part of his arm has dried a little too much, so just add a little water and bring a little bit of shadow at his crook of his arm. Okay, and this purple needs to get a little darker as well. And transition to a little bit more intense blue. That will be one more of his symbols when all is said and done. Okay, and I still want this reflection to be a lot brighter color. And there's a little highlight in the center of it. So bring that in, and rather than spritzing it, I'm just going to come in and touch along those edges a little bit in hopes that they will run out a little bit beyond where we see them. And if I have to, I can always spritz it later. Yeah. There is more of the phthalo that actually extends into some of this other area, little hints of it. So let me just extend it out here a bit. And again, I should have wet this area before I put that color down, so let me just wet it now and pull it out. All right, and here I need a little reflection. It's probably not quite hot enough pink, so let me, these are what I believe is a microphone pointing down onto his, that reflection is not, okay, onto hit towards his drum head, and that shape a little better. And I want some more purpley transitions in here. Just bring some of the blues back in to make these a little bit softer transitions on this section. Here, even though I don't think phthalo's the color I'm seeing in the photo, it feels like the one I need. I think that's an important thing when you're doing a painting, is don't get too tied up in the colors in your photo. Worry more about what does the painting need rather than what does the photo say. This color just a smidge more, and a little tiny bit at that tip. I think the microphone's an interesting little highlight that we don't want to lose. And his arm has actually faded a little bit too much, so let me bring another coat back up on his arm. some of the purple blend. Needs to transition here and back to the Verditer blue on the edge. So we have some good transitions. Here, I'm going to first wet this so the paint will flow a little better. This is more of his arm. See if I can't get a little bit brighter, a little faster here. This is the quinacridone rose. Which is the same I was using over here. This bluish violet color, which needs to be here. Fades out, that'll be about right. I'm gonna grab a little more of the violet. I need to bring it up and a little bit more towards a purple here. Pretty good. All right, now let's get this in the right spot. This is coming down here, right next to that line. Continues on down into here, and then it is also forming some of the base of this, well, not the very base of this drum, but a good chunk of just before the very bottom of this drum. And I'm going to need to run that into some other colors here in a minute, but let's get this in here. It's running up probably a little higher than that, and probably want it repeating a little bit up in the other higher parts, carving out some of these other shapes. There's going to be more colors put on top of this, but I think this will help define and unify some of those later colors. Okay, so below here, this is going to end up being darker, but I'm going to start with the purple. So, you know, we started pretty loose with throwing in colors here, but now we're starting to get to the point where we want these to look like joined sections of the drum. And so I need to get a lot more finicky about how I'm painting them. They're going to become darker slices, but for now my goal is to kind of carve out some of the lighter colors. That will become reflections. Let's see. So I do have a lot of drawing on my painting where I've indicated little reflection spots. So I'm trying to, you know, stick fairly accurately with retaining those little reflection points. I'm not worrying about whether I have the right color, you know, that was in the photograph for what those reflections should be. It really doesn't matter. We just want to have reflections. In fact, there's a lot of little yellow reflections in here, and I didn't like the idea of only having a little bit of yellow in that one spot. It didn't feel right to me to introduce that color change, because there's no other yellow anywhere in this painting, and it really felt wrong to have that yellow there, so I decided to not include it. Now I prefer, when I'm doing these little reflections on drums, to do it this way rather than masking off the reflections and coming back in later and trying to add them in. They end up looking a lot more harsh. Now, when all is said and done, I'm going to have to put a coat of water over all of this. The mixture of purple is fading out here. Put it back up again. Okay. And at some point, I do think I will be spritzing this with water in order to make all of this feel a little bit softer. And you know, honestly, I don't know which of the shapes at this point are supposed to be reflections and what's supposed to be the outline area. So I'm just, you know, I occasionally look up at the photograph, but mostly I'm just trying to have some interesting little reflection shapes in here. Now there's a lavendery color that was supposed to be coming down in here that I seem to have missed. Okay, so here's where that big phthalo section is. So let's retain that. There's a dark that comes across here. Some of these whites are going to have to tame down a little bit. Should be a little bit more color in some of those. To become what? Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm trying to just bring in touches of other colors, since I used pretty much the same color all the way down there. And I think this is closer to this color that was supposed to be there. these areas were also supposed to break off and be little pieces. Blank spots. Okay, so in this area, mostly I dabbed in some of the purple here and there. Now I'm coming in with clear water so that these purple areas will run into it. And a little bit of this blue down here for some variation. And then that. There will be black, so I'm going to put a little neutral tint for now as a place saver. The neutral tint I'm going to apply fairly thick. Looks a lot like a black. I don't like to use neutral tint in large areas because I think it gets boring in color. But in a small area like this, I'm fine with it. Put a little bit of ultramarine blue and burnt orange mixture which makes a really nice dark to black. Let me get the ratio right. It's getting close there. And just zing this up a little bit with some of that blend. Just adds a lot more pizzazz than the neutral tint by itself. Now I've got a little bit more of the ultramarine blue so that it's actually transitioning in color as we go down. This blue actually comes down along both sides of this little white area. Put a little of that down along the edge also of this shape, which honestly I don't know what it is, nor do I care. It's part of his drum set. I'm guessing it's part of the support structure that holds the drum. That little light color was supposed to and I added that purple transition shade. I lost a little bit of the blue that I wanted there at the base of the drum. There's going to be a lot more darks in this drum head to eventually, but for now we have at least some interesting shapes going on up here. And I'm definitely seeing a lot of blue surrounding his hand. Now this should be really soft, so let me wet the area first with a lighter version of the blue, so it's sort of a nice soft edge. Running up here. And then come back with a brighter part of it. Should have wet up here too. And let that flow in to the area that I wet. And then this also comes down here. Now I want this also to be a fairly soft burst of color on the edge of this drum. Kind of softening out around the white areas. It's also going to come up along this edge. That, by the way, is his drumstick that we're seeing moving on the other side of this drum. It's got a little bit of a bluish glow halo almost around that stick. Actually, I see a little more red sticking out there. And this should have been an even brighter rose color. I don't know why my Quinn Rose is looking less neon-y than I remembered it being. I wonder if I've had it in this palette a little too long. Or maybe I'm applying it too heavily. I don't know which, but it's feeling a little off from what I was hoping it would do, but I guess it will go better with the curtains in the background. I'm actually mixing a little of the verditer with the cerulean blue here. I think I want a little bit of the opaqueness of the cerulean in that halo. Oops. Yeah, since that was very wet. I now have that running all over on the red. So we'll lift some of that out. Well, I can lift it. And actually I'm enjoying the results. So, you know, these little accidental flows sometimes are exactly what you needed, because it feels like the blue is encroaching on the stick and it's giving it actually a little bit of a 3D dimension that wasn't there before. A little bit of blue schmutz coming into this arm probably carried it on. No, my arm's clean. My arm's innocent for a change. All right, I think I'll reinforce that one spot just a smidgen more and add a little bit of color variation in here, a little bit more darker blue here and there. It's not all just the one blue. And just leave that to kind of blend together as they so desire. This drumhead's going to get a lot darker. If you can see in my photo, it goes essentially to black. This is maybe a good spot where using the neutral tint will play out well. So let me just put a little of that in here as sort of a little test case. Kind of emphasize where this line is. Separating that part of the drum. Upper edge, and then this is the lower edge. Now rinse my brush out, dry it a little bit, and just pull this color. And somebody's decided they really want to talk to us. A little bit, because I don't want it super black all the way down. I just want little darker shapes, and you know, I just need to figure out just how dark do I need to go to make the drum shapes look convincing. And there's this little piece that comes down here that's I think it's a clamp on the drum that we're seeing, that little line coming down there, and I don't want to lose that. And then, you know, go a little darker again down here, pick up a little bit more paint. And bring some of that down here. Now, I'm actually wondering, I think it might be best if I wet this area. Just slightly. There are a few more blue colors that should have been down in here. I'm just going to hit these a little bit more. I left them a little whiter than I needed them to be. So use that as an excuse to re-wet that area. And then this blue here is still not popping up quite as bright as I want it to be. Throw some of these colors in, get these nice and wet in here. There's actually more of this that attaches across to here. And that like stand, sort of a color passage. There and down here. And even that highlight doesn't need to be quite as strong as it was. And this side. It's kind of a combination of phthalo blue and the Verditer. So I'm going to wet this down. Try to pull this color up a little brighter and alternate between these two. So there's a little more interest in that microphone. I'll have to continue some of that up, but right now I want to keep focusing on the drum head. So now I got the neutral tint, and I'm just gonna touch it here and there where I think it's supposed to be darker, and let that wet paint carry it around. A little bit of a definition coming down this edge of the drum. And there is definitely dark that's intersecting with these purple bits coming down at the bottom. And remember, where I put in a lot of this purple was supposed to be darker shades. So I'm partially following the purple and partially just bringing in color where I think I need to emphasize some of these existing shapes. And hopefully it's still wet enough over here. There's another one of these vertical connectors that I want to emphasize. And a lot of this is other colors in the source photo, so let's at least try to maintain some of that. And I think joining that part of the drum up is good. Still looking a little bit too distinct, so I think I'll put a little bits of the cerulean blue around here and there. because that is a little more opaque and it will actually draw those colors in. And on this side I want to hit a few more of the pink colors because there seems to be more pink reflections on this side than blue, so I'm gonna still bring some of the blue in where I know I need it. And I'm tilting the paper at this point so it can kind of run and merge and do a little bit more interesting things. I still don't think that I have the top of the drum quite as bright as it should be because I want those reflections to really stand out. And they're not doing that just yet. And still leave some of the light things that are going on there. Now I am also have not really painted that particular reflection. So let me get that in there. It starts out at this end with some of that same red that's in his hand. And it's got a nice white burst. So I'm gonna try to leave that white burst in place and then grab, if I can, some of this lavender color, which I have. Oh, that's not the lavender. This was the lavender. It's gotten pretty dark, but actually I think that's the right color that I need. Put that right there next to the other side of the burst. And then this is going to be another transition to dark. And I'll start at the bottom with the neutral tint. And I'm not going to continue it terribly far right now. Just a little bit in this area. I'm going to let it fade out because I'll be bringing the shirt color down here eventually. I do want it coming around this corner, fairly dark. Actually transitioning to this blue. More of the Verdier blue in here. Between his hand and the microphone. Transitions back to black, and for now I'm just going to grab this neutral tint for that purpose. I think it's a small enough area. The neutral tint's going to work. I'm looking back at the photo to see if this being a hard edge is going to work, and I think a little bit more of the Verdier coming around this side. It's a little bit more gradual transition. Now, actually, the rest of that blue needs to pop up in color, so I guess this is as good a time as any to bring some of this up into here. Carve out shape of the microphone and its stand from some of the background. And the rest of the stand. Okay. I think a little bit of neutral tint that needs to be here and there, up here, just for some variation in color, but a pretty light application of it, so it just shifts the colors a small amount. This needs to come a little further down as well, but with a light version. With a neutral tint. I think I did a little bit of lifting there that I don't want, so. Without coming on top of his hand, which granted is a, it's a blurred, permuted shape because he's moving. I think I need the cerulean again to kind of help define that shape. So even though that's not the color in the photo, it has the right properties of paint to make that work better. And it's introducing some nice color changes, so kind of like that. Even this little starburst area, I think would benefit from a little bit of that cerulean blue. Put it on, and then I lifted it off a little bit so that it would be a bit lighter. Being granulating color, it also lifts really well. I'm just going to extend that little light area that way. And similarly, there should be another little light area here. So, now that most of the colors are where I want them, I'm going to add a few little color adjustments here and there. Repeat some of those other brighter colors. This still has not pounced up enough. Got this one little acrylic brush. It's a little flat, but it's such a small flat. I can get some small, teeny tiny spots raised. So if I've lost a little bit too much reflection, I can pull it back pretty easily with this little brush. It's not extremely stiff, but it's stiff enough that you can do some good lifting with it when you have some opaque shapes underneath. And I want to do that because when I put the neutral tint on top, you remember I was working pretty loosely because I wanted things to be blending out some, and I lost a few little highlights that I want to get back. Not a lot, but just a few here and there that add just a touch of color variation. So like there's just a little bit of a pinkiness right there. And these are supposed to have a little bit of a bluish tint to them, so I'm just putting on tiny bits of cerulean to pop them back into the right colors. You know, they are lifting pretty well to the color underneath, but every now and then I see a spot where it's like, okay, let's just put a little tiny dash of color in there. And here there were some really interesting little lavender shapes. So I do want to lift back into some of those where I couldn't see exactly where things were. And you know, where these come down and then there's a little squiggly section that kind of joins to them, I think that's all part of the attachment process for the construction of the drum, and I want to make sure that those things are somewhat believable. For the drummers who may look at this painting and say, what the hell? What happened to that drum? Let me get a little bit of paper towel. To help lift those spots. I don't want to go to a harsh scrubber. I don't really like, you know, those do a little too much damage to the paper for me, for my liking. So I'm resisting using those. I'm actually going to bring a little bit of blue back up here and there along the edge of this because I think it should be a little bit narrower than it ended up looking. And I think it's going slightly taller than it should, so let me stop that right there with a little touch of blue. All right, I think that drum is looking, you know, once we look at it, you know, and the whole painting has been developed, I think it's going to look fairly convincing to be what it is. All right, now earlier I put some light stripes of blue in areas where it really needed to be black, so I'm going to put some neutral tint on top of that. And there's some little funny shapes going on with the microphone that I want to retain. There's little knobs that stick out. Where there's where they affix they have, you know, they have little segments where you can lower and raise and lower the height of the microphone, and so having a few of those little details are always really nice to keep things recognizable. I'm bringing in a fairly narrow line here because I'm seeing more shapes that look like I need to retain those. Okay, and I think this comes over here a little further. And the danger of putting this in early is I don't have all the other colors fully developed, so I think I'm gonna stop with the neutral tint until that all gets a little bit more mature. I mean, I am gonna continue it down to the bottom. I'm using this little flat right now because it's just about exactly the right width where I need this dark stripe to the right of and now that I've gotten my photo wet, it's making it a little bit tricky to see where the dark was and where the blue was, but I think I can see enough of my lines that I know this, and coming up into here, should be some of the dark color. So I'll wet that and then bring in the neutral tint. And because it's going to be a larger space, let me come back and grab some more blend of the ultramarine and burnt orange. It's not quite dark enough. Paint these. And these two containers have dried out quite a bit, so they'll need to really loosen it up again before it's going to work. And I'm just going to bring it out to these areas for now. I do need to soften some of this. See there's not quite enough ultramarine in that mix, so here we go. Now we're getting it back again towards the black. And I'm running out of the Verditer blue, so let's put some of that back out. Could be Verditer. Never quite sure how to pronounce some of these pigments. And I want to intermix and go back and forth between where I've got the black and where I have the blue, so that they're intermingling. I can actually come in with some of the neutral tint again too. So you can see that, you know, even though I started over here and was trying to just get lighter colors in, I never actually quite finished that. I migrated to this side and then started developing further because I felt there were some timing issues I needed to make sure I got on this other side. And so the overall plan of getting a light color across the whole lower surface didn't happen. But, you know, sometimes you just need to pay attention to the paint and do what's needed rather than your painting plan when you started out. And this is part of that same drum, but you know what I haven't been able to figure out is why one side goes down further than the other side, and whether I live with that and accept, you know, it's probably just a separate drum. This drum probably ends with this line, and the other drum picks up over here. So rather than assume that, you know, I know my photo is, or my drawing is accurate, for where I want these other colors, so, you know, I need to just trust it and then decide if I need to adjust colors so that this and that feel a little more separate, and I'm thinking that might be better. So let me, some of this purple, we'll bring this a little bit lower into even this area where I know I'm seeing blue in my photo. Just bring that purple down to sort of help, you know, define these are a little bit different drums. And I'm also bringing in a little bit of purple where I earlier put some cerulean in, because I feel like the cerulean is just a little bit too light for what I needed there. Now there's one more little bright reflection that I'm hoping I can pull out. There we go. So often you can just bring things back, and I want a couple a little bit brighter reflections right in here. So I'm lifting with a little flat brush and then dabbing with a paper towel to get the paint off that I've loosened. And there's, you know, there's slightly more brightness on this left edge of the drum, where I guess it's catching just a little bit more light. So I want to pull some of those back out, and let's see if that is there, then this should be slightly more purple. There's another light reflection that kind of pulls it into this drum and clarifies that this is still part of the drum. We haven't quite made its way all the way over to the mic stand yet. Then the fade. Okay, so let me stop there.